Yesterday, Governor Scott Walker came to the Milwaukee Rotary and said his proposed 2017-29 budget would move Milwaukee forward. But we're at Milwaukee City Hall to ask Mayor Tom Barrett if he agrees, and I want to thank, to help me ask questions, Journal-Sentinel City Hall reporter Mary Spekuza, an old friend of Wisconsin Eye. Thank you, Mary. Mayor, thank you very much.
It's great to have you here in City Hall.
Thank you. What's the city's top priority in the next 2017-2019 budget, which is another way to asking, would Governor Walker's budget move your city forward?
Well, let me back up a half step if I can.
Sir.
The city of Milwaukee is moving forward, and it has been moving forward for a number of years. And part of what we want out of the budget is we want to change the narrative here, because I think for many Wisconsinites, the sport has been let's get down to Milwaukee, and let's consider Milwaukee a drain on the state. And I want people to know that the new Milwaukee is not a drain on the state. In fact, there's a Milwaukee dividend that the state is gaining from the city of Milwaukee's incredible economic activity. And specifically, what we did is we went back and looked at State Department of Revenue numbers from 2007, 2008 in a wide range of categories as to how much money came to the city, the county, and the school district. And we also looked at the money that was generated from the city of Milwaukee that went to the state. And using the state's own numbers and comparing apples to apples, what we found was that there is a Milwaukee dividend to the tune of about $460 million that the state is getting above what it sends back here to the city, county, and state in those categories that we look back at 2007. So to answer your question, we'd like some recognition that the city of Milwaukee is really an asset to the state. And if someone says to you, the city of Milwaukee is a drain on the state, I'd like you to stop them and correct them and say, no, you look at this Milwaukee dividend, and the state of Wisconsin is benefiting from having Milwaukee's incredible economic activity. So specifically, what do we want? I would say by far our biggest challenge we have right now is public safety. A lot of your viewers will be shocked to hear this. The budget for the Milwaukee Police Department is larger than the budget for is larger than the tax levy for the entire city of Milwaukee. Our tax levy is about $263 million. Our budget for the Milwaukee Police Department is $302 million. And that doesn't even include the employer payment to the pension, which is probably another $30 million. What does that mean? That means that we have a difficult time just maintaining the strength of the Milwaukee Police Department, given the fact that shared revenue has either declined or stayed stagnant for well over a decade. Not just a Republican issue, Republican-Democratic issue, but that's what we want to do. We want to change that relationship. And we're not doing it as a beggar with our hand out. We're doing it saying, hey, look, there's a lot of really great things that are going on in this city, but we need to make sure that we're doing what we can to have the public safety. So that is first and foremost, is how do we get more dollars here for public safety, which is something I think everybody agrees with.
A very quick follow-up question. When you say Milwaukee exports $460 million, that's my term, does that include aid to MPS, shared revenue to both the city and the county, aid to UW Milwaukee, aid to the Milwaukee Tech College? I'm just trying to understand.
So what does include, it does include MPS. It does include aid to the city, shared revenue to the city and the county. It does not include UWM. It does not include MATC. But the other categories, and again, when we did these comparisons, we used the exact same categories between 2007 and 2015. So that's when I say we're comparing apples to apples.
So the governor's budget would free shared revenue at $620 million, which you know. So your number one priority is to see that increase.
We have to. We have to. And again,
no.
I'm couching this in terms of public safety because people understand this. I think if you looked around the state and looked at what percentage of a tax levy in each municipality went to public safety, you're going to see ranging from 20 to 40. Again, we're over 100% of the tax levy going to public safety. And the reason for that is we have a lot of visitors from outside the city that come in. And whether you're in New York or Chicago or Washington, of course you're going to have a stronger police presence. Some of it is because of public safety concerns that we have in some of our poor neighborhoods. But some of it is to make sure that you can come to Summerfest, you can come to the ballpark, you can come to all the activities that we have in the city of Milwaukee and be safe. And we want people to come here. And Milwaukee is by far the largest tourism attraction in the state of Wisconsin, and we want people to understand that as well.
Are Milwaukee Democrats united behind this goal? And it seems like they've lost power at the legislature in recent years. And how has that affected Milwaukee?
Well, I think clearly anytime you've got a change in power, and you go back to whenever the last change was, 2010, when both the Assembly and the Senate shifted from being Democratic to Republican, that dynamic changes because the Democrats that represent the city of Milwaukee are not in positions of authority like they were 8-9 years ago. So of course that has an impact. But we're trying to also educate the Republicans, and that's why I want them to understand that this is not a situation where we're asking for pity. No, we simply want to have that partnership strengthened between the city and the state. That's what we want. We want to strengthen the partnership. I'm not looking for any pity at all because this city is doing very, very well. It is true that this city has 72% of the region's low-income people, which is the second highest concentration of low-income people in any major metropolitan area in the country. So I feel what we've accomplished is pretty amazing. We've had our hand tied behind our back, and that we're asked not only to house 72% of the region's low-income people, but then to have economic growth. And all you got to do is look at the construction growth between 2015 and 2016, the first quarter. The construction in Milwaukee clearly outpaced the construction in the state and nationally. There's something going on here in terms of economic activity, and all you have to do is come into the heart of the city and you're going to see the cranes. You can't miss it. It's different from what it was 10 years ago. It's different from what it was 30 years ago.
Yesterday, in his remarks to the Rotary, the governor said, my budget would increase road aids to local units of government, cities, towns, villages, and counties. But I want to put that in context when his budget also delays the $31 million to begin planning the east-west rebuilding, and it does not include finishing the north-south end on the Zoo Freeway. So can you talk about the impact of the governor's transportation budget on your city and region, sir?
Well, I've always maintained that you can go anywhere in this state, and people want to make sure that the roads that come from their home to the interstate are in good condition. That's the number one concern, without a doubt, no matter where you are. And that's true here. The local roads are important. And I think it's important as you develop these aid formulas to look at the miles driven, to make sure that you're serving the people. And that means you have to look at which streets, which roads are the ones that are traveled to make sure that those are the ones that get some aid as well. So we like the local aids. There's no question we like the local aids. We want to make sure that the formula is fair to everyone and does not disproportionately benefit or hurt one part of the state or the other part of the state.
When do you think, though, the east-west freeway, now since it's been bumped from the planning stage, when do you think it might get finished?
That's a question you have to ask the governor and the legislature, because I think what happened was you had all these promises that were made to everybody. We're going to build this, we're going to build that, we're going to build this. And all of a sudden, somebody sends a bill, and the state realizes, wait a minute, we don't have the money for this. That was not a shocker to me, or it wasn't a shocker to anybody who was following this, that you had all these promises that were being made. And now you're seeing a punting contest to see how far the punt can go to delay the payment of those things. And at some point, you've got to pay for what you're building. It's that simple.
The governor recommended a pretty sizable boost to education funding for K through 12, including more money from Milwaukee. Were you surprised by that, and do you think it's enough?
Well, obviously, all the draconian cuts that we had seen over the first 6 years, I think what happened was he realized, I can't keep doing this. And the pressure wasn't coming from here necessarily. It was coming from all over the state of Wisconsin to make sure that you started turning that around. And the political realities and the fiscal realities for local school districts, I think, made it almost obligatory that there was going to be an increase. So to answer your question directly, of course I'm pleased that there was an increase. Again, the formula distribution is something that I think is not necessarily fair to all school districts, because what you're doing is you're going to have some very, very wealthy school districts that are going to get a lot of aid, and you're going to have some struggling school districts that aren't going to get nearly as much. And that's why you're seeing this conversation, I think, in some parts of the state about, are you going to combine more school districts? And it's in the rural areas, it's in the poor areas of the state where I am concerned that you don't have the equity issues that we need to deal with there.
I think one of your fellow Democrats called it a deathbed conversion proposal that would kind of heading into 2018? Do you think this was largely fueled by his reelection?
I would be shocked if that were ever to be the case.
The Journal Sentinel story about 3 weeks ago reported the four-year graduation rate of MPS is still 58%. They're going to get 48 million more out of the governor's 200 per pupil first year, 204 second year. Reaction to that graduation rate, and do you think that additional money can make a difference? And then finally, do you think Superintendent Driver is on the way to finally beginning to increase that four-year graduation rate, sir?
What I find most refreshing, and I see Superintendent Driver making public appearances around the city. We oftentimes are speaking together. She is the first to acknowledge that the Milwaukee Public Schools have a serious challenge when it comes to graduation. So this is not a situation where she is in denial. In fact, to the contrary, she is looking for more partnership. She's looking for ways to improve this. That's one of the reasons, for example, that she asked the school board to change the timing of the school year. Because there's a lot of kids that need that June period to make up lost credits. And if they don't make them up in June, then they start slipping farther and farther behind. So I think it's very refreshing that our superintendent acknowledges just how big a challenge this is and is willing to tackle it.
Choice was passed, let me get the math right, 27 years ago. 28,000 formerly MPS students are now in choice schools. Are you happy with that in terms of them getting as good a education as if they were an MPS?
I think that there are some schools that perform magnificently and there are some real stinkers. And I think what has been missing is accountability for any school that is funded with public dollars. And there has been opposition to that. That, to me, is the travesty in all this, that regardless of whether you're a public school, a public charter, a non-public charter, or a choice school, there has to be accountability because, first of all, you've got the public dollars there. But second, I think, in fairness to the kids, so that they know what's going on. So I would love to see a serious attempt to finally come to that issue, to say, let's have accountability in these schools.
You're not convinced that a Milwaukee child in a choice school is getting as good a education as if he or she...
Some of them are. There's no question some of them are, but some of them are not. And again, I think it depends on the school, and it depends on how the school is operated. That's a huge issue, because we've seen some that are really, really good schools, and then we've seen some fly-by-night operators. And it's the fly-by-night operators that hurt everybody. Most of all, hurt the kids.
Seems like transportation funding is a huge problem right now, and you're a former legislator. How do you think the governor should be paying for our transportation future in the state?
When you say it's a huge problem, it's a huge self-inflicted wound, because this is not a surprise to anybody. This has been years in the making. And as you recall, it was only 6-7 years ago when there was the whole debate over using general purpose funds, or using transportation dollars for GPR purposes, for education, for healthcare. And it got so heated that there was the constitutional amendment to prohibit the use of funds coming out of transportation going to general purpose. Now the shoe's on the other foot. And I think what you're going to see, and you can already hear the rumblings of this, is attempts to go into funds that could be used for local government, funds that could be used for education, funds that could be used for healthcare, and having those dollars shift into transportation. And it's because the math doesn't work. It just doesn't work. You can't, and no one expects all of this construction building to occur without having adequate revenues. Again, I wasn't born on a turnip truck. You got to pay for what you build, and to make believe you don't, I think is unfair to the public.
Follow up on her question. A 5-cent increase in gas tax would raise $167 million. Is it time to raise the gas tax?
Again, the Republicans are running the show on this thing, and they're going to have to come up with a revenue source, and it has to be a fair revenue source. And do I think that transportation revenue should be used for transportation purposes? Yes. That's why I supported that constitutional amendment 7 years ago. It made sense to me. Transportation revenue for transportation expenses. I don't think revenues that are being raised to pay for prisons or health care or education, that necessarily should be used for transportation. And I think that's where the big political battle is going to occur.
Do you think people with concealed carry permits should be able to carry on municipal buses?
No, I don't. I don't think that if you have a policy, as the Madison transit system did, I think that that is a policy you have to respect. Clearly, the court didn't respect that. I think, unfortunately, I don't think anybody was surprised looking at the history of this court that that was going to be the decision. And to me, that's one of the troubling things about the court right now is there's no surprises. You know what it's going to be. It's almost like politicians in roles.
The governor's budget includes, the capital budget includes money for a new Department of Justice Southeast Wisconsin Law Center. In the budget in brief, in the governor's budget in brief, it mentions 2 sites, potentially City of Milwaukee or Waukesha County. Is the city in a position to offer DOJ a potential site for that?
We could give them a site tomorrow. I could give them a site this afternoon.
Should it be in the city of Milwaukee?
Of course, I think it should be. It was in the city of Milwaukee. That's the irony of this. If you look at the crime lab, it was in the city of Milwaukee for years. Now, why the state would want to take the crime lab out of the city of Milwaukee is beyond me. I mean, I hate to say that, but we're not asking to have the Department of Agriculture located here. The reality is, just from a very practical standpoint, you've got Milwaukee police who are going to be their biggest clients. You've got Milwaukee district attorneys that are working for them. You've got people who are in this field who I think should see the neighborhoods that they're dealing with and create employment in these neighborhoods. I think that having it in the city makes all the sense in the world. And again, it was 100% politics that you had that directive that said that it shouldn't be in the heart of the city, where it absolutely should be.
Governor Walker said that he would like to see Chief Flynn and Sheriff Clark get on the same page when it comes to enforcing immigration laws or doing this program where law enforcement officers would essentially become immigration officers. What do you think about that?
I think a lot about it. First of all, here's what I want our Milwaukee police to do. Again, there's a lot of great things that are going on in the city, and I'm proud to be the cheerleader for the wonderful things that are going on. At the same time, I'm not denying the fact that we've got some issues. And public safety is one of the issues. We have too much violence. There are too many guns on the streets of the city of Milwaukee. I want my police to be chasing guys who can't possess guns, who are killing people, who are shooting people, and are dealing drugs. I want my police officers to go after dangerous people. If you've got a 25-year-old guy who moved to Milwaukee when he was 8 years old from Mexico, and he was not documented, and he's now 25 years old, and his headlight is out, do I really want to use up my precious public safety resources to have our police officers sit with him in a detention center for 3 hours? Of course not. And then I think anybody who looks at this is going to say, look, it's the federal government that's dropped the ball on this. Why are you, in fact, drafting City of Milwaukee police officers to do this? Now, the county's a different situation. I can tell you, I've had this job for nearly 13 years. I have never once seen Sheriff Clark at a crime scene. And so what he does with his resources, that's going to be his decision. Our police officers are out there trying to make safer streets, and that's what I want them to do.
In 2018, you want to offer any career advice to Sheriff Clark? Do you think he should seek re-election? Do you think he should run for the U.S. Senate?
I think
this
he's
is your
got
chance to
I
advise
think he's
him.
got a great gig going right now. I think he's fighting crime, one conservative cable TV show at a time. He's made a great name for himself, I think, as the darling of the conservative cable network. I think he can make a ton of money doing that.
Is he gone? Is he doing that at the expense of doing his job as sheriff, Mr. Mayor?
I think if you were to ask people who know what's going on here, they would say that he rode his horse out of town a long time ago.
Okay. Let's talk about the governor's building capital budget, $85 million for the UW-Milwaukee campus.
That's a good thing.
How important is that?
That's a good thing. UWM has more Wisconsin students, I think, than any other university in the state. People don't realize that. There's a lot of Wisconsin students that go to UWM. For first-generation students, it's a very, very important place. For people who are working, a lot of the students are working. And so having an urban university, I think, is very, very important. So we welcome and embrace that in investment. And one of them is for the old Columbia Hospital. And that's been sitting there for some time. So it's great to finally see that ball rolling.
Well, but a quick follow-up, quoting the Journal Sentinel, my old employer and your current employer, that recent headline, 1 in 5 African Americans at UW-Milwaukee do graduate within 5 years. Only 1 in 5.
Oh,
The
again, I
reaction?
think they've got a good job to do. I mean, they have to do better. All the schools have to do better. I will say this, I was just looking at a report yesterday that said the best school in this nation for, I think it was students of color, or it could have been African Americans, and I was surprised, it was Ripon. So you learned something when you come and interview me. It was Ripon.
Sure do.
So what changes to gun laws do you want to see that would help fight the crime numbers in Milwaukee, and what do you think you can get passed?
Well, we've talked about this a lot. Clearly, we have a situation here where an individual who is charged with a number of misdemeanors, particularly ones that are violent in nature, those people should not be carrying concealed carry permits, guns. They should not be permitted. And what happens because of the load that the district attorney has here and the court system has, it's not a shock that some of these cases are going to be pled down, that might be a felony somewhere else, are going to be pled down to be a misdemeanor. When that occurs several times, you've got to recognize the reality that that person shouldn't be carrying a gun. So that's number one. And to me, that's a pretty straightforward one. Unfortunately, I believe the NRA opposes that, which makes it virtually impossible with this legislature and governor to get it passed. A second one has to do with the straw purchases, that there has to be meaningful sanctions for straw purchases. I get frustrated when you've got the girlfriend who goes in and purchases the gun. That's one of the things we see. I get frustrated when I see the fellow 30 miles from Milwaukee opening up his trunk and selling the guns. Those are the types of things that I'd like to see the background checks for. Again, when you think back several years ago and we had the horrible shooting in Brookfield, the 3 women who were killed in the spa, the perpetrator of that crime got that gun by looking at I think it's armslist.com. I think that's the name of the website, and went to Germantown, a McDonald's parking lot, and purchased the gun. Had nothing to do with the city of Milwaukee. He was from Brown Deer, goes to Germantown, buys a gun, kills 3 people in Brookfield. And he had a domestic violence restraining order against him that had just been issued. And there was no requirement that there be a background check for him. Anybody could see what was going to happen there. And so the laws were working. You have a lot of people opposed to this say, well, just enforce the current laws. He had just received a domestic violence restraining order literally hours before it happened, but the seller of the gun didn't have to look at that.
And didn't he indicate he wanted a gun quickly?
Oh, yeah. I've got money. I want it quickly. I've seen the email. You've obviously seen the email as well.
Yeah.
Do you support the proposal in the governor's budget, $26 million to help Milwaukee County buy new buses?
I think it's a good proposal, yeah. Again, I think the county executive and the governor worked that out. I don't have any problems with that. If they've worked that out, that's good for everybody. A happy ending there.
Okay, all right.
Who do you think is the best Democratic candidate to go after Governor Walker?
Well, I want to see what kind of
Is it
year
you?
Is it
Aaron
you?
Rodgers.
Yes.
Aaron Rodgers he had a good year last year. I think he could have another good year this year. Giannis is a big favorite in Milwaukee right now. So,
What's he averaging, 26 or something? Good.
Yeah, Oprah Winfrey, of course. Her name has been bandied about for president, but she lived in Milwaukee for a while. She could come back here. So there's a number of people.
Is Tom Barrett considering it?
You know, I did it. I've done it before, and so right now I
Been
love
there,
this
got
job.
the T-shirt.
Yeah, I love this job. So this is what I'm focusing on right now.
So never ever, like Taylor Swift, or
Oh, I'm never going to say never. Why would I ever say never?
You're not going to give any list of potential Dems who you'd like to see consider running?
Here, I'll tell you what I think is going to happen. I think what's going to happen is we're going to see how the Trump administration plays out, because the Republicans had their fun. If you go back to 1993, when I was serving in Congress, that's when Bill Clinton had his health care plan. The Democrats had their heads handed to them on a platter in 1994 because they tried to move on health care. In 2009, 2010, the Democrats again tried to move forward on health care, and they paid dearly at the polls. Now the Republicans are the ones that are trying to move on health care. If you have 24 million people, more people, who are without insurance, to me that's a moral issue. That is a moral issue. How this nation could say, oh yeah, we're going to let 24 million people go without health care so we can give a tax break to the richest people in this country, I think you are going to see a much different election, and I think people will be standing in line to run for all these offices.
Which leads me to my next question. Governors, including Scott Walker, have said, we want more power over Medicaid and potential block grants. You just said, what did you say? Milwaukee has 75% of the low income? 72% of the low income in the nation. What are the implications for Milwaukee's low income residents with Medicaid changes coming down the pike?
Well, first, I think people should understand, most of the dollars that are spent on Medicaid aren't going to the little kids. A lot of them are elderly. A lot of the dollars are going to elderly people in nursing homes. Again, a sympathetic group of people who have worked their whole lives. Then you've got the whole opioid situation. And I find it very ironic that you've got the president and others talking about how they're going to do all this stuff for opioid users, but how are they going to fare if it's going to be opioid users versus your 83-year-old grandma? Who's going to get the money? And I don't even want to say who should get the money. You have to have in place for vulnerable populations safeguards, because by definition they don't have the political clout if they're vulnerable populations. But if you ignore them, you only make the problems worse.
Governor Walker has not had much to say about this plan. We've asked him repeatedly. He said it's a work in progress, that he'd like to see some changes made. He has not said which changes he'd like to see made. Does that surprise you after 8 years of him saying repeal Obamacare? This is a
Well,
disaster?
again, I've heard him say that hundreds of times, repeal Obamacare. I've heard him say hundreds of times, be bold, be bold, be bold. So the silence is deafening.
But the 72% have a great stake in the changes coming
Oh,
for MA, don't
absolutely
they?
yes. Absolutely yes.
And you sound afraid that they're going to get significantly less care under these potential reforms.
Again, when you have the political rhetoric based on the argument of repealing Obamacare, and then all of a sudden you're talking about block granting Medicaid, that's a much different issue. That's a totally different animal. And clearly what the Republicans are trying to do is to bootstrap that Medicaid, that they've wanted to block grant this for decades, and now they see it as an opportunity to do that block grant. But again, and it's not political activists. I think you can see in some of these town hall meetings, yes, it is political activists, but you also see a grandma standing there who's 63 years old who's saying, look, my premiums are going to go up $14,000. You can't manufacture that stuff. That's real. That's real. And I think Democrats learned that in 1994. Democrats learned that in 2010. I think the Republicans are going to learn that in 2018.
Top priority of Wisconsin Democrats next election year: re-elect Senator Baldwin or defeat Governor Walker.
Oh, we can do more than one thing. We can chew gum and walk at the same time.
Is there going to be
Let's
enough
do
money
both.
available for both those
But
campaigns?
there's not going to be enough money for either one of them. Citizens United obviously has changed the dynamic on that in a huge way. But you can't fold up the tent. We know we're going to be at a huge fiscal disadvantage. But I think the dynamic is going to be a different year in 2018.
You've known House Speaker Paul Ryan for some time. Are you surprised that this is essentially his plan and he's the one out championing it?
He's always had an interest in health care. It's going to be interesting to see at the end of the day how much the president embraces this, particularly if it doesn't move as smoothly as the speaker wants it to move. Success has a lot of parents. Failure doesn't have a lot of parents. So it'll be interesting to see at the end of the day who owns this. And again, I think the governor clearly doesn't want to own this. And there's not a lot of people moving forward right now who want to own this.
I think today Ryan said that he had worked with President Trump on this plan and was kind of
He wants to put his armor on him right now. We're buddies. We're buddies.
Well, as Republicans get more seats in the Senate, the Assembly, are you able to talk about the importance of Milwaukee and some of the Milwaukee Only issues, or are you finding more resistance among GOP members of the Senate and the Assembly?
Well, first of all, I don't think there are a lot of Milwaukee Only issues. Again, I think our public safety issues, because of our size, because of our that's a unique issue. But aside from that, there are a lot of communities that share the same challenges that we have. And I think we need that. And what I mean by that is, of course I have to have alliances. We don't have the political muscle here. We just don't have the numbers here. Our population is 600,000, and the state is, what, 5.7, 5.8 million?
Yes.
We just don't have the percentage that the Democrats had or that Milwaukee had in 1948 or 58 or 68.
How optimistic are you about the Urban Affairs Committee headed by someone not from Milwaukee, Representative Gannon?
Gannon.
I'm
Yeah.
always optimistic. It may take a little education, but again, I want people to come here, and particularly those people who have negative feelings. I want them to come to this city. Think of the old Milwaukee beer. Now think of new Milwaukee. We've reinvented ourselves, and again, we've got challenges. I don't deny that we have challenges, but you can't be surprised that you're going to have challenges if you're the home to 72% of the low-income people. But at the same time, what we're seeing is we're seeing a lot of young people. We're seeing a lot of people who are young at heart, who want to be part of what's going on here, and it's pretty cool.
Any final? Are we
I
done?
don't think so.
Mayor Barrett, thanks
That's a
so
wrap.
much.
Good. Yeah,
Thanks
we're
so much for your time, Mayor Barrett. Mary, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.